Mr. Skinny goes to dinner with Mr. Greedy. In the whole wide world, there is nobody less wide than Mr. Skinny. He is as thin as a rake, possibly even thinner. And as you know, he lives in a very thin house in Fatland, at the bottom of a hill. On the other side of the hill lives somebody who is possibly the widest person in the whole wide world. That somebody is Mr. Greedy. Now, Mr. Skinny is one of Mr. Greedy's best friends. Would you like to know why? I'll tell you. Mr. Skinny is just about the only person who Mr. Greedy doesn't mind inviting over to lunch or tea. And the reason for this is Mr. Skinny's appetite. It's the smallest appetite in the world, which means that Mr. Greedy doesn't have to share any of the meals he cooks for them. Mr. Greedy invited Mr. Skinny over for lunch the other day. He cooked sausages and chips and beans. Mr. Skinny ate one chip and one bean and one mouthful of sausage, which left Mr. Greedy with lots and lots of sausages and lots of chips and lots of beans, all to himself, which suits Mr. Greedy down to the ground and up to the sky. It wasn't much fun for Mr. Skinny living in Fatland. When he went out for a walk, he felt very out of place. Fat dogs would giggle at him from under fat flowers. Fat worms would chuckle at him from under fat flowers. And fat cats would hide their sniggers behind their fat paws. It was definitely no fun being skinny in such a fat place. And last week it nearly became too much for poor Mr. Skinny. He sat down on a fat log beneath a fat tree. "I wish I was fat," he sighed sadly to himself. Suddenly, a wizard stepped out from behind the fat tree. He was large and chubby and fat. He was just the sort of wizard you'd expect to see in a place called Fatland. "I quite understand," he wheezed. "How fat would you like to be?" "Oh, very fat," said Mr. Skinny with a grin. "Then very fat you shall be," wheezed the wizard, and he muttered some magic words. There was a flash, and Mr. Skinny disappeared in a cloud of smoke. When he stepped out of the smoke, he was, well, not skinny. He was fat. Gloriously, chubbily fat. And for the first time in his life, when he looked down at himself, he couldn't see his feet. All he could see was his tummy. And what a tummy it was! He was so proud of his new tummy that he took it straight round to Mr. Greedy's to show it off. As he walked along, a huge hollow rumble came from that huge tummy. For the first time in his life, Mr. Skinny felt hungry. He arrived at Mr. Greedy's house and knocked on the door. "I'm starving," he announced when Mr. Greedy opened the door. "Have you got anything to eat?" Mr. Greedy stared at Mr. Skinny's tummy. "Crumbs," he said in awe. "I'll need a bit more than that," said Mr. Skinny, and patted his tummy. "Oh, come in," said Mr. Greedy, and Mr. Skinny squeezed through Mr. Greedy's front door. Mr. Greedy went through to the kitchen and started cooking. And he cooked, and he cooked, and he cooked. But just as fast as he cooked, he couldn't keep up with Mr. Skinny's appetite. Mr. Skinny ate, and he ate, and he ate. He ate 14 sausages, 2 whole chickens, 1 steak and kidney pie, 4 tins of peas, 8 jam sandwiches, and 12 cream buns. He ate Mr. Greedy out of house and home. He ate so much that for the first time in his life he got a stomachache. "I couldn't eat another thing," he groaned. "Oh, a good thing too," said Mr. Greedy. "There's nothing left to eat." Mr. Skinny went home to sleep off his meal. But when he got home, he discovered that he couldn't fit his new-found tummy through his skinny front door into his skinny house. Poor Mr. Skinny spent a cold and miserable and uncomfortable night outside in his garden. And Mr. Greedy spent a miserable and uncomfortable and very hungry night in his bed. "Oh dear," said Mr. Skinny in the morning, "I wish I was thin." And I'm sure that you can guess who turned up at that moment. That's right, the wizard. And he turned Mr. Skinny back to the same skinny person he had been the day before. "What a shame," said the wizard, and shook his head sadly. But Mr. Skinny was as happy as could be, although he was not half as happy as Mr. Greedy was, to see his friend back to his old, skinny self.